But just in the interest of time and certainly like the breadth of the subject matter that we have to cover here today, we'll kick it off. First and foremost, and I said this to the panelists before we joined, I'm super excited about today's topic. I think as we've seen the evolution of cannabis licensing in the state of New Jersey, the big sea change that we saw under CREMA, the adult use law, was this shift in authority in the licensing process down to the local level, right? Where you consistently have your state approval processes that you have to follow, but certainly the municipalities play an ever increasing role, and we see that play out in real time. So we have a great group of panelists here today who have approached this from several different angles, from the state angle looking down, to the municipal angle, to the applicant angle, to the planning and local approvals angle as well. So a lot to digest here today, and super excited for the program we have, and most importantly, our panelists. But very quickly on the New Jersey Cannabis Trade Association. As you see there on the screen, the NJCTA was founded in 2020 and is comprised of the state's permitted medical and adult use cannabis operators. Again, the big difference between NJCTA and other associations statewide that have cannabis membership is our members are exclusively comprised of licensed operators. The NJCTA's mission is to ensure that the legal cannabis marketplace is not only safe, accessible, and affordable, but also equitable, profitable, and just. To achieve this, the NJCTA strives to shape public awareness and encourage the implementation of thoughtful and responsible cannabis policy in New Jersey, and serves as a singular voice before the executive branch, legislature, regulator, media, and the public at large on the complex matters that impact our industry. And I'll just briefly say, so this is another installment of our Business Builder series. We've been doing this over the last year or so, covering a bunch of different topics from a bunch of different angles. And really this series came out of conversations that we separately were having with the CRC, where there was a lot of information being requested about how this various program that's evolving in real time operates, right? And the request that was made of us was, how can we make more information available to especially social equity, diversely owned, and impact zone businesses, the types of businesses that we certainly want to see licensed and who may need these resources the most. So this installment is navigating local approvals, and as we'll hear about and talk about today, there are multiple different facets that go into that. So I'll stop hogging the airtime here, turn it over to our panelists. I think as we think about navigating local approvals in New Jersey, I think a good starting point is figuring out, well, what do I need for the state? What does the Cannabis Regulatory Commission need as it's assessing these applications? And I think there's no better person to start this off with than Jesus Alcazar, who is everything and anything and everything intergovernmental affairs at the CRC, and certainly handles a lot of these questions regarding municipal processes. So for Jesus, prior to joining the NJ Cannabis Regulatory Commission in 2022, Jesus spent 6 years in various roles across state government. After graduating from Rutgers University in 2015, he started his career in state government, working for the New Jersey State Legislature across 3 different legislative districts around the state. Then in 2019, he joined the governor's office to join the Intergovernmental Affairs team. While there, he was responsible for interfacing with municipal officials to address local and regional challenges facing southern and central parts of the state. So Jesus, you've interfaced both with the CRC and outside of the CRC with a lot of these municipal officials and in these municipal processes that we're going to talk about today. But given that that applicant engagement with municipalities is driven, at least in part, by what will ultimately be needed to submit to the CRC, can you give us a brief overview of what is required of an applicant in connection with municipal approvals for the state application process?
Yeah, absolutely. If you're looking to apply for a conditional license in the state of New Jersey, all you need is ultimately just to pay the fee and process the application with us. It's a very flexible process where you do not need municipal approval, you do not need site control of a location, you do not need zoning approval. It was created to provide an easier avenue for certain applicants to get up the initial review process taken care of at the CRC. But for those looking to convert the conditional license into the annual license or apply for the annual license outright, you will need three things. First is a resolution of support from the local governing body. It needs to be something that states the entity name, your entity name, right? The location that you're proposing your business at. And that's it, right? So the resolution needs to come from, again, the governing body, if it's a township council, whatever the form of government may be, but that is how you show your support on the municipal level. Next, you will need a letter stating that the proposed location is suitable for any cannabis operations you're looking to engage in. So obviously, the towns have full authority as to where, what locations are permissible and for what type of licenses, right? If it's cultivation in this one particular area or only retail in this other location, the letter will just need to come from either a zoning board official or be a resolution from the zoning board, again, acknowledging that the location you're looking to set up shop is permissible for whatever classification of license you're seeking. In the appropriate location. And then third, most critically, is the proof that you have control over the location. So that's, evidence that you've purchased the property outright or a lease agreement. Those are really the three big things that we need. And the municipality has more of a say over the resolution of support, the zoning letter, and then it's up to the applicant, of course, to figure out an ideal location that is allowed to have cannabis operations in that municipality. So ultimately, those are the three things that any applicant will need when either converting the conditional to the annual or the annual license outright.
Yeah, and by the way, super helpful, right? Because I think oftentimes there can be a misconception from applicants of, well, hold on a second, my resolution says something along the lines of the zoning, right? But I think to the CRC's point, the statute is the statute, the regs are the regs, and you need both, right? And I think that's often something that we see a lot of cure letters associated with. So kind of applicants knowing that on the front end is super helpful. I think the other fascinating thing you said was, kind of just this concept of opt-in, opt-out, right? Like not every town is open for cannabis. And even within those towns, not every property, not every zone is open for cannabis. And all of CREMA, that entire statute, that municipal regulation section seems short, but the discretion that towns have built into that can be some of the more complicating factors. And again, I know a lot of towns have a lot of questions, right? So I guess a question for you would be, given your role at the CRC, what are some of the most common questions you get or issues that arise, either related to towns' questions on the processes or even common questions that you get from applicants related to that local approval process?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think sometimes the towns are surprised with how much control and authority they ultimately have under the CREAM Act. Essentially, right, sometimes they'll reach out and ask us, hey, what's the distance cannabis operation has to be from a school, a church, a playground, right? What hours of operations are permissible? And ultimately, there's nothing on the state level, right? That authority exists solely with the municipality. It's really up to that community to determine essentially those metrics, right? So I would say that's one of the most common things that pops up. And sometimes the towns also may not be aware that the state takes over the responsibility of performing regular checks, right? Inspections, site visits, both announced and unannounced, right? Making sure again that these license holders are abiding by the rules and regulations, right? Making sure that trash is being properly disposed of, right? Making sure again, right, that their metrics, the systems are fully operational, that there are ID checks happening at the front door before individuals are allowed into a retail dispensary, for example. So, a lot of that responsibility, or nearly all of that responsibility, falls on the municipality, it falls on the CRC, and the municipalities are unsure about what their role is, right? So, sometimes I have to emphasize, like, listen, don't worry about these things because the CRC is here. We have a full team of investigators, of compliance officers that will routinely, engage with the applicants directly to make sure, again, that everyone is following the rules, creating a safe environment, protecting their employees, and protecting consumers, right? So yeah, I'd say those are the two biggest things. It's just a little bit of uncertainty as to what the role the municipality plays in the day-to-day operations. And ultimately, again, just not realizing again just how much control they have over the process.
Yeah, and Jesus, I think you just hit on such an important point, which is like I think towns sometimes operate under the misconception of, oh, it's on our shoulders now. I mean, like the only difference between this business operating and selling to minors or selling products that they're not allowed to sell is, you know, whatever process we have crafted. And I certainly remind towns in every conversation, realize that a cannabis business within your border, within your borders is going to be the most highly regulated business within your town. It literally has cameras in every corner of that facility where the CRC is watching down to make sure that that activity is compliant, let alone those inspections, unannounced inspections, and things like that. And I think oftentimes towns, you know, kind of, you know, what's the phrase, lose the forest among the trees, or vice versa. That you know, the control and oversight of these businesses by the state is really immense, and you know, I think sometimes the more that towns hear that, the more helpful it is for opening up those opportunities for businesses. Um, I'll say as a quick follow up, and I give the staff of the CRC so much credit on this. Staff of the CRC has put out so much great guidance for municipalities on, you know, kind of the scope, boundaries, outline of what they can do, what they can't do, and things like that. You know, can you give a sense, both for applicants and any municipal officials who might be tuning in here today, you know, for this town specific, local specific guidance outline of how this process work? What resources does the CRC have available for towns and applicants trying to understand this local process?
Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, one of the most frustrating aspects is ultimately that the municipalities, again, they determine the local processes, right? They determine how they want to issue out local support and those municipal resolutions of support, right? So, unfortunately, it's a case by case basis for each municipality that has chosen to opt in, right? And so, you know, for applicants, sometimes it's really just about engaging the municipality directly, because the CRC does not have any jurisdiction, any oversight, or any real involvement in how the local municipal officials go about engaging applicants, right? But that being said, we're still here as a resource for applicants, right? So if there's questions about the licensing process, we have an inbox dedicated specifically to answer questions every day about, you know, what comes up during the application process. If there's questions, concerns, right? We're always available to talk either by phone or email, whatever is easiest for the applicants. So we're always available to answer those questions and provide as much guidance as we possibly can, despite the fact that, again, it varies by municipality for each municipality. With regards to what we can do for the municipalities, I often actually end up attending local meetings. I go to that community and offer myself as a resource to answer questions, right? And I've been to a handful of communities already where, you know, they'll have local council members, anyone who may be a part of the local cannabis review board, if they've established one, the police chiefs, the township administrators, the municipal attorneys, and so on and so forth, right? And I'll literally, you know, just sit down with them, spend a great, you know, solid 2-3 hours just answering questions, right? Reassuring them that, hey, listen, like, this is a wonderful industry. We have to make this process easy for applicants to get involved and be a part of this industry, right? And so, you know, I'm always available to sit down with these municipal officials to reassure them that, again, this is something you absolutely want in your community, because the folks that want to get involved are already existing small business members, or those who want to be, you know, who are aspiring entrepreneurs, right? That want to be involved in the community. So, you know, any chance I get, I absolutely love going to these communities directly and having a face-to-face conversation with those individuals that want to learn more. They want to know, you know, again, what authorities do they have on in terms of setting metrics and how they can safely allow these industries, these businesses to come into town and, you know, be a cooperative neighbor for the residents.
Yeah, no, and Jesus, I think what you hit on, and it's again, kudos to you for being that resource, especially for towns, and being that kind of on the ground voice for what it is and what it isn't. I mean, look, misconception and misinformation and miseducation, I think, is usually the biggest impediment to the local process and local approval. So, kudos to you for doing that, and the other thing that you said, and we have a question in the chat that I'll just briefly answer here based on what you said is, look, there's no state setback requirements associated with these cannabis businesses. Where you see those setback requirements are in local ordinances, right? So towns are certainly empowered to say, I don't want a cannabis facility within 100 feet of a church, a school, 500 feet of a church or a school, but that's up to the individual towns. I mean, one of the questions that was asked in the chat was proximity to a daycare facility. And I think there's two answers to that, right? One is what does your local ordinance say on that? Does it set a sensitive use setback on that? And two, and this is something that I'm sure Chuck will touch on a little bit later when he talks about kind of the different level of local processes, is even if the town doesn't affirmatively prohibit proximity to a place like a daycare facility, be aware, do you have to go in front of a planning board, and what's the reaction going to be of potential dissenters there, right? So again, it's multi-tiered regulatory oversight. Again, kudos to the commission staff on putting out guidance and certainly educating municipal officials on what's kind of inbounds and out of bounds. But there's several different layers of regulatory oversight, even at the local level, that we'll talk a little bit about here. But Jesus, thank you for that. That's certainly helpful. And again, Jesus is a great resource for everyone. So never feel shy about reaching out to him. Talking about kind of local processes, right? So again, I'm thrilled that we have officials from two towns, two cities that have been praised by the commission for how it's approached, their local cannabis processes. And we'll start with Zenobia, who, in addition to being the head of economic development for the city of Plainfield, also a 2018 lead New Jersey classmate of mine. So of course that's her bragging rights. But Zenobia, first and foremost, thank you so much for joining us here today. And again, Plainfield's been praised by the CRC for how it approached regulating cannabis within the city. Can you give us a sense here today of the types of priorities that the city had in mind with both its ordinance and how it goes about supporting local applicants?
So thank you, Mike, for inviting us to be a part of this panel. And also thank you to my lead New Jersey fellow member. So class in 2018, as he reminded us, or we were talking about pre-COVID class. One of our main priorities is that we want the process to be clear and concise. And most importantly, we want to make sure that it's clear how it aligns with the state process. So Jesus was mentioning about the application fees. One thing that our ordinance speaks to is really looking at, he was talking about the difference between the annual and the conditional. Our ordinance really speaks to the annual license and the state license in terms of how many classes that we distribute. So in our ordinance, what we're looking for right now, and our application fees for all 6 classes are available. We're talking about cultivation, manufacturing, wholesale, distribution, retail, and delivery. Then what we have in our ordinance is also a clear vetting process that we go through. That I'm sure Jesus has had many conversations with our lead point of contact, Ernest Bennett, who is a zoning officer, who's able to walk through the land use process, because this is an industry that has to deal with the land use and understanding where we can locate these businesses. Ernest will be able to walk you through what you need in terms of a business plan. We were talking about geography, the distance, that another cannabis retail distance can be within 200 feet of the other. We do consider, when we go through the site plan review process, what are the neighboring uses, but that is left to our planning board. It is not delineated in terms of a certain distance. We do look at what we have in terms of the track record of the applicant? Do they have the qualifications that they need? Do they have operational capacity when they're doing this? Do they have the financial solvency to be a successful business? Because coming from an economic development point of view, we're looking to promote a thriving industry, not just necessarily a one-off. When we go through the vetting process, we're very clear that it goes through the Department of Economic Development, which houses our cannabis unit, it houses our land use, it houses our zoning. Then we also escalate as we go through there. That's vetting process with our administration on through the mayor. And in order to move on for a recommendation to the state, you need a city council resolution of support. What we're looking for in the business as well is we were talking about how are we balancing the equity issues. And this is a great opportunity to look at how are we promoting disadvantaged businesses. We are looking, one, that you are led by a disadvantaged women, minority ownership in a company, or you are also looking to have some form of local ownership. So eventually, whether we're talking about the percent of employees, that it has to be at least 30% of the employees either reside in the city, or at least 3 employees, whichever is greater. In terms of looking at cultivation, we're looking at it that where you're actually getting not just the cultivation, but sourcing your products, that 25% of those are local. We currently have four businesses that are looking at cultivation and manufacturing. This is a great opportunity that we're looking at to reinvigorate our manufacturing and looking at another perspective in terms of what we're doing for looking at the industry for advanced manufacturing, for looking at other jobs for the city. Right now, we anticipate this will bring hundreds of jobs to the city with the industry. We just had a cannabis job fair in May where we had all of our vendors represented, and we had close to 100 participants that were looking at potential jobs. And we're not just talking about entry-level retail jobs. We're looking at HR jobs. We're looking at finance jobs. This really is a cluster industry that is an opportunity to develop for us. So to answer your question, Mike, for priority, we're definitely looking at that this is going to be a thriving industry for us. This is going to be a local opportunity, and we're also looking at equity issues for our local residents.
Yeah, and Zenobia, and again, for anyone, for all the ordinance nerds out there, I would urge everyone to take a look at Plainfield's ordinance, because, as Zenobia talked about, it seeks to tackle several different issues in what I'll say is a transparent manner, right? Like we want benefits for local citizens, and if you're gonna locate here, we want a good corporate citizen, right? So I think I think you answered so many great questions for applicants of like, what's your first touch point in a city, right? If I'm interested in Plainfield, and again, kudos to Plainfield for putting in its ordinance, this flows through economic development. Here's the person to start the conversation with. I think a problem that a lot of applicants have when they're looking at even opt-in towns is there's a generic process of a class 5 facility should be this, but there's no indication on, well, who do I contact in the first instance to figure out what you want for a resolution of support, right? So again, Plainfield does such a great job at identifying here's what we care about, and here's how you initiate the process, here's how you go through the process, and recognizing this distinction too of like, hey, look, as a city, we may be okay with you as an applicant, but the planning board still has jurisdiction as to who you are as a use within your zone. And I think oftentimes applicants kind of misunderstand that element of it, that like, if I'm putting a supermarket in, if I'm putting a host of any other conditional uses, I have to go in front of a board that's going to look at these things like the aesthetics of the community and things like that. Zenobia, so I guess two quick follow-up questions on that. I guess one, what positive impacts have you seen the adult use cannabis legalization process bring to Plainfield? And two, and maybe related to that, can you give us a sense, because as you started talking about earlier, where Plainfield is in this process, can you give us a sense for what the next year looks like for cannabis companies in the city of Plainfield?
I think definitely positive use is looking at it is revitalizing our advanced manufacturing industry. We have a LI location, a light industrial location in two parts of our town right now. And I'm sure a lot of other cities you're looking at these vacant warehouses that are a blight on the city. We currently have a Mack truck building that we're talking about over 450,000 square feet that now we are basically able to fully occupy with this new industry. It gives us an opportunity to activate parts of our retail spaces that were once vacant. And I can't go back to enough to the amount of jobs that it's going to potentially create for us. And I think the thing that we're excited about in the upcoming year is that we get to go into seeing is believing mode. We get to look at, in July, we hope to open our first retail facility. By the end of the year, we're going to have our first cultivation and manufacturing businesses open. And then over the next year, we're going to open our consumption lounge. So we're going to be able to see the rate of unemployment go down. We're going to see different spaces in our downtown activated, and we get to literally see Plainfield continue growing as a destination. So I'm gonna lead into Chuck a little bit because I know he's going to cover the land use, but we get to grow a lot of 4 districts that we're talking about. We're going to grow our central business district. We're going to grow our light industrial district. We're going to grow our transit oriented development district, as well as our other commercial districts. So we're seeing a lot of these places that were vacant right now, but we are actually thinking, how are we creating these centers or hubs for activities?
And Zenobia, I mean, I think, well, first and foremost, I completely agree. And I'm so excited for that. I mean, I live right down the road from Plainfield. It's such a beautiful city. And I think you see so many other, kind of other towns in that region who are putting it more on Route 22, the outskirts of town, and Plainfield saying this is a business, this is an industry that we're leaning into, and we want it, in as many practical zones as it makes sense for. And the other thing that you touched on, which I always remind everyone, when it comes to adult use legalization in New Jersey, we're still in the bottom of the first inning, right? I mean, like, we just saw the first 2 adult use only stores open up last month. I think we're seeing a steady trickle moving forward. And for these cities, I mean, that's where I'm excited for the next year, because don't get me wrong, we're not going to get to the 9th inning in the next year. But the opportunities are still there. They're still alive. They're growing, and we're going to see it in real time. And so I'm super excited for that. So Zenobia, thanks so much. And Chuck, I know you, you wear kind of 2 different hats is what I'll say, right? Because you work both on the private side and then separately, you've been critical with the city of Ewing in crafting this process. So a similar question to what I posed to Zenobia. Again, Ewing's been praised for the manner in which it regulates cannabis, within the city borders. I know you played an active role in that process in Ewing. Can you give us a sense, again, as to the priorities that Ewing had in mind when it passed its adult use cannabis ordinance?
Sure. And thanks, Mike, for inviting me to participate in this panel. As you said, I do hold sort of two hats on both sides of the aisle, where I work for municipalities and operators themselves outside of the municipalities I work in, of course, because I can't work within the towns. But I also am the president of my trade association, which is the American Planning Association, as well as being part of the Cannabis Advisory Group, who has done symposiums with towns, and we bring experts from around the country to those municipalities so we could talk about the economics and security and the environment and job creation and all those things with the towns and have constructive dialogues with them. So, but specifically for Ewing, I mean, we entered the game really with a specific interest in supporting the medicinal program in 2018, and frankly, we still are, although we do allow adult use but I think primarily because within those first 2 years of expansion, we were able to continue to have a rolling dialogue with our council to get folks who are not fans of adult use and frankly still aren't, to get them on board to know that it's not the boogeyman under the bed, that we can control it responsibly and sift through a lot of the folks who are trying to get in the adult game, to ultimately give endorsements, and allow them to move through the process. So in Ewing specifically, our priorities really are about folks who honor the medicine first and foremost. So I know not everybody's interested in the medicine part of this industry, but we are. Ewing's priorities really surround patients and the community at large. So we want our operators to specifically have a direct connection to the community or the surrounding region. In fact, our local application highlights these interests, and it's primarily what we focus on when applicants come to us. We ask similar questions as to what the state application asks, but because we know the CRC is doing a good job focusing on the financing and backgrounds and SOPs, et cetera, that's not our focus. But similarly to what Zenobia had said, we do want a robust industry. Our focus, though, is really getting folks to recognize how the community will benefit from the new industry, not just in jobs and taxes, but in initiatives that we work directly with the operators on. So when an operator comes to us, we ask them to come with direct contact with folks that are from the community. Whether it's folks from our Municipal Drug and Alcohol Alliance, leaders in the faith community, advocates and activists such as the Trenton chapter of the NAACP, or folks like the guys at Black Cannabis who are doing some really great programs for the community, and even rec and health advocacy groups. I would say, as I know, a lot of folks who are listening today are looking for advice. I'd say the biggest piece of advice is to research the town you're engaging with. Come with the local connection, of course. Because esoterically, communities like Ewing are supportive of equity initiatives, but that gets lost if you can't have a direct and local connection with the town itself. So, folks that we engage with that come with just doing simple Google searches about the town, understanding what folks are doing in the town, and having that discussion that gets them to know that, hey, they thought enough to look us up and figure out, what we're about. That really engages a really fruitful conversation thereafter, because you only get one chance to make a good impression.
Yeah, and I think the other interesting thing, let me ask you the question, is especially with Ewing being an early adopter, so to speak, an early opt-in, is there anything the city has learned, right, over the, whatever it is, last several years of having opted in? Any kinks that you've noticed or worked out in that municipal process that might be of value to other towns who might be listening in?
Honestly, I think I've probably learned more about working with a lot of different municipalities on this issue than necessarily the Ewing one. Zenobia knows as well, the municipal process in New Jersey, devoid of cannabis can be an extremely burdensome process. And it's one that, the legislature built in municipal control, but they didn't build it in. They recognized that control actually exists. and it exists through the municipal land use law, which has been in place for a long time. And it's really difficult to navigate the planning and zoning process. And despite our efforts over the decades to reform it, the legislature won't touch it. Home rule is strong, and frankly, it's beyond the political will to do so. I think the last governor to try to really tackle this issue was Governor McGreevey, and that initiative died when his untimely departure, saw him outside of the office. I've learned, most people who are trying to get through the process don't know what's entailed of the process itself, unless, of course, they come with land use professionals attached to them, or they had some experience in the real estate development game as part of our team. So, I think, making sure that you have some knowledge of that process and what it's going to take to get through it, because it can take months and months. Usually we build in 6 to 9 months. In some towns it's got to be a year because of the way they operate.
And add a Pinelands on top of it, or some other regional overlay as well.
Well, right, you're right. Because you got all that as well, as Todd found out, being originally located in a floodplain. And then what I really have kind of seen is, and the CRC has provided some guidance to municipalities, but largely they listen to their professionals that are on the team, and most of whom in the state are consultants. I have seen municipalities really stretch the bounds of reasonableness as I've taken private clients to towns I don't directly work for. You look at some of those communities whose application process costs tens of thousands just to enter. Some communities have spot zoned, others have placed conditions upon the sites that makes it really impossible to do business there. And I would say that until it goes legal federally, we're really going to continue to see discriminatory zoning practices. We just are, and there's really nothing we could do about it other than major league legislative reform.
Yeah, and what I would say to that point too is, like, I do think there's a distinction between, like, what I would call like intentional conduct on the part of towns versus just this reality that it's new for them as well. They're trying to wrap their heads around it, right? Their easiest way for wrapping their heads around it is to put it into this land use context, even if it's a square peg in a round hole. And the additional thing I'll say there, and plug to the planning association, Chuck's Planning Association. They're doing a great job on a yearly basis, holding seminars on this specific context, right? Because I used to get asked the question all the time, what's a model ordinance? And candidly, like, I can never point to a model ordinance, because, like we've heard from Plainfield and Ewing, it's got to be tailored to the individual needs of your town, and like how you do that and then fit it into existing zoning. And I want to tie this into a question, because I think this goes to Chuck's point, to misunderstanding of applicants. Yes, we know that the towns have authority here. Town authority is multi-level, right? It's resolution, as Jesus identified earlier, it's resolution of support from the governing body. It's a letter identifying that the zoning is compliant. Now, even after you submit your application, you may then also have to go to the planning board, to the zoning, board of adjustment, depending on your individual site and its characteristics and its features. Separate and apart from that, eventually you're going to be submitting plans to your building or construction department, right? So, like, just right there, we're talking about 3 different levels of municipal oversight, not even bringing into account Department of Transportation approvals, DEP approvals, regional overlay. So before I kind of overwhelm the audience, Chuck, just in that vein, beyond that resolution of support, give applicants that sense of, like, what else should they be looking at in the ordinance of a Do I need a site plan application? Do I need to go in front of the planning board? Give folks that sense of, if I look at an ordinance and I'm looking at a site, what do I got to be bearing in mind of those other local municipal approvals?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you hit the nail on the head. Every town is different. And, you know, they're governed, we got 564 or 5 municipalities in the state, all governed by different forms of governing bodies, whether it's 3 to 5 to 7 city council or aldermen or whoever. And then they're, you know, they enter these processes to create ordinances that, you know, are going to, they're listening to the public as they go through the creation of that ordinance process, and the public's telling them, hey, stay away from daycares, hey, stay away from schools, or, you know, make sure that they're not too close to one another, and we only want 2 of them, and things like that. So the ordinance process itself is it's a really like it's akin to the sausage making process. You really don't want to participate in it sometimes. But land use entitlements, which is ultimately what everybody's got to get, right? You got to get zoning approval somehow. Most towns are kind of zoning this into existence, either through permitting it in certain zones with buffer requirements, and other towns are doing conditional use requirements, which says, you got a site, and as long as it meets criteria A, B, C, like buffers or a certain size or this, that, and the other thing, then you're permitted to do business there. But the municipal land use law almost inevitably kicks this thing to a planning board or a zoning board, and that public review then looks at, do you have enough parking? Is your landscaping right? What's your signage looking like? Is your security right? Are you gonna smell up the neighborhood? Things like that. So while you're getting ready for that, that's a couple month process, because your engineer is engineering a site plan, and then they're putting that together, and they're getting comments from the town's professionals, and then you get to the board and you get your approval. 3 months, 4 months later, you think, yay, I'm done. No, you're not. You still have the other agencies who have jurisdiction here as well, whether it's soil conservation, NJCTA, like we talked about with Todd's situation, the county planning board, if you're on a county planning, or if you're on a county road, local utilities, and then the special resource areas like the DNR Canal down here in the Trenton, New Brunswick, Delaware River corridors. They have oversight. The Pinelands Commission has oversight. So while we're all in the process of trying to figure out this new industry, we also have to figure out how do we get municipalities and these other agencies, to think more intently about how can we make this process a little bit more easier to navigate. Now we have great things coming out of EDA and the BIA with support from the applicants, but as Mike and I have talked from time to time on this issue, we got other things the state, other factions of the state could participate in, like the Division of Codes and Standards. Mm-hmm. Not looking at cultivation facilities as what they call an F use in the construction code. We should be looking at it as indoor ag. Well, that requires some change in the uniform construction code, because it ends up costing operators huge money, because you're dealing with huge occupancy loads as if you're building a manufacturing plant for auto parts, and then fire protection mechanisms and things like that. So and then others is like the Department of Labor, who have oversight over workforce development boards, and what's the next level of training for the workforce itself. So I know I went a little bit beyond the question, but I thought it was important to kind of add those other things to it.
No, but and Chuck, it goes to the point that we were just saying, that we were just talking about a minute ago, which is, we're in that bottom of that first inning, even for local boards, for these other agencies, right? I mean, everyone's just trying to get their understanding, their vantage point, right? And like we joke about that all the time, right? We've had several instances where our client is the first one to go through a town and get an approval. And the reality is oftentimes our client who's first ends up having double, triple the length of the time at that hearing, because most of your job is educating that local board, right? And those that come after you get that benefit of that institutional knowledge, but it takes time across the board. And I think, the other global point that I would just urge, those in attendance to walk away from Chuck's comments with is like, you got to understand the constellation of local approvals, right? Like, again, we know what we need for the state, for the CRC, but like the difference between getting that approval, that application award from the CRC and getting open, there are a host of additional different steps that go into that. And, I think the municipal land use law in theory has a structure for how these things are supposed to work. But this is the cannabis overlay where at times it's the square peg in the round hole. But again, know what you're getting into with eyes wide open.
Yeah.
And just on that, and we'll round it out here with our executive director, and I think Todd brings a very unique vantage point to this discussion, because he's the executive director of the New Jersey Cannabis Trade Association, right? So, part of his role is to hear all these issues, both from licensees as well as prospective members. But also separately, he's served in senior leadership of a New Jersey medical license associated with the onboarding of that license, right? And then the third hat he's wearing here is he's also an applicant, right? So he's started navigating these local approvals for his own individual venture. So Todd, just with that backdrop, you bring this unique vantage point, but given your experience, what are some of the more unexpected or unanticipated issues you've encountered as part of those travels as you're navigating these local processes?
Yeah, thanks for the intro, Mike. Really excited to be here, and I share your excitement about the panel that we've created for this event. I think, really to echo what Chuck was saying, there are so many issues that you're going to face as an operator and going from applicant to operator. Many of them on the land use side, but the one that I found was really most impactful to helping me get through the process, especially when I was at Justice and working with Chuck and Mayor Steinman and the City Council, was being knowledgeable about the rules and understanding what the municipality cares about most, because that is also a very individual thing for each municipality. I mean, everybody cares about security, but really understanding, is there a specific community aspect? Is there an education aspect? What is it that the municipality that you're going into cares most about? And then really understanding. I mean, I'm not a lawyer, Mike, but I feel like I'm one degree below a JD after these years in cannabis, because you've got to know the statute. You've got to know the statute, the state statute for CREMA. You've got to understand the ordinances that were passed by the specific municipality, and that all comes into play when you are taking questions from the mayor or the city council or the director of economic development, whoever is running the process. And as Zenobia mentioned, they want to know who you are, and are you going to be a good partner? Are you going to be successful in getting your operations up and running? And to do that, you've got to have a firm grasp of all of the issues. You've got to understand that. You've got to read and come in prepared to educate the folks that you're going to be speaking with, and that also helps build the confidence that you're going to need for them to want to give you that resolution, especially if there is a limit on the number of operators that they're going to allow in that municipality. So that was what was probably most surprising to me, was just how in-depth the knowledge was going to be and how much preparation was required.
And that's a great point, right? And it goes to this point that I made earlier, which is oftentimes when you're the first one going through this town, like, you're going to be educating the board, right? I especially for some of these more, I'll call them more simplistic square peg and round hole site plan applications required under the ordinance for cannabis businesses that are really just kind of internal fit outs and shouldn't be part of a site plan. I always say a lot of those planning applications are like, what is a cannabis, right? Tell me how this operates. Tell me how many employees you have. Tell me what security and storage mechanisms you're gonna have. As I think Chuck said earlier, tell me about your odor mitigation plan. Like all of these things that go into the education of just the town wanting to get comfortable with it. Candidly, I think part of the reason that you've seen so many towns even require site plan approval for what is otherwise internal fit out is just so that you can notice all your neighbors within 200 feet, which is a requirement of all these land use applications. Some of it's just like, hey, it's coming. Why don't you just come and voice your concerns? And I've certainly found that in site plan applications in that way. But Todd, to your point, knowing everything down cold as the client's representative is so critical for these hearings. I've been in one hearing, and we talked about, I think in our submissions, that every product that comes into a retail dispensary gets weighed and then entered into metric. I've had a question asked before, in that weighing, is the weighing machine certified by the Commission for Weights and Measure? You know what I mean? Like types of questions that you would never think, but it goes to the municipality just trying to get comfortable for themselves and for the public that you're asking the right questions.
Now, Chad, that's a very specific question, and it shows somebody has probably a little bit more knowledge than the average. But as operators, a lot of us are living and breathing cannabis every day. What we don't realize is that some folks, especially on the city councils, aren't as interested as cannabis as we are, unfortunately. And it's not even unfortunate, it's just a fact of the matter. And so you have to understand who you're speaking with and start them at level 0 if that's where their knowledge is, or level 7, or Chuck is a level 9, 10 already. So if you're going to try and teach Chuck something, you better really be on your game. But a lot of folks that are going to require that education, you're going to have to start at that beginner level and move up from there. And there are going to be a ton of questions that need to be addressed and answered.
Yep. Okay. Can I add to that real quick, Mike?
Go ahead, Chuck.
You bottom first inning. I mean, we're still a cannabis 101 with municipalities. Maybe the 201 class in some municipalities, but we have to constantly, as cannabis folks, remind ourselves, you have to go back to the beginning, have to be patient and work the problem, because there's a lot of education that still is necessary. Thanks.
And to that point, be humble in that process, right? Like these are folks who are working they're on these boards. They already just finished their work day. They don't need to be spoken down to and things like that, right? Now, Todd, I know we're tight on time. I'm going to ask you kind of like 2 truncated questions that are interrelated. We talk so much about the town process and zoning, right? Site selection could be its own webinar in its own right? And certainly understanding the ordinance leads into how can I find these properties. But having gone through this process, Todd, what are some of those site selection considerations that have gone through your mind as you're looking at sites? And 2, related to that, I go into town, I might understand that, retail cultivation is permitted in this zone, that zone. How do I even navigate that? Like, what resources should I be looking for at the municipal level, whether that's zoning maps, whether that's working with brokers, whether that's literally just pounding the pavement on site selection? What are those considerations, and what are the resources that you've utilized in that way?
Yep. So some of the municipalities have put out zoning maps, and those make it very helpful and a lot easier, I guess, to identify sites that will be zoned correctly for cannabis. That's a starting point. I think that's the first. Then you can also reach out to, if you have a friendly contact within the municipality, is there an area specifically that they would prefer cannabis be located? Even though you have the zoning map, should you go in any place in particular or look for any place? Are there properties that are potentially owned by the city that are dilapidated that they'd like to see fixed up? Is there any way that you can find a location that will, again, help the municipality become what their vision is for the future? And so leaning on the municipality to the extent that you can. Some places may not be that interested in helping, but a lot of times there are folks there that can point you in the right direction. I will say there are a number of minefields that you want to try to avoid when picking a site, and I did learn this the hard way. As Chuck alluded to earlier, you know, our cultivation facility at Justice was it was in a floodplain or a floodway. There's different things. That's another thing. I not only did I get 1 degree below a JD, I think I became almost a general contractor as well as civil engineer while doing all of this. And so, you know, if you're in real estate development, I think somebody said this earlier as well. If you're in real estate development, you've got a little bit of a leg up in trying to figure out how to ask the questions about the locations that you're going into. If you're going in not having done real estate development and understanding as you said, Mike, the Pinelands or the DEP, the Department of Environmental Protection, that kind of owns any, not owns, but if there's a location is in a floodway, then you have to get DEP approval when you're making upgrades and doing construction. These are things that can cost additional money. They can cost additional time. And ideally, if at all possible, you want to avoid them. And to do that, you want to bring a civil engineer with you when you're looking at locations, potentially an architect that might know the law, but you really need the local and the state, somebody who knows the local and the state specific laws regarding those properties. That will save you money and time as you're looking. Now, it's difficult to find a site. So if you can't avoid, a floodplain or Pinelands or whatever the case may be, being on a county road where you have to get the county planner involved, a lot of times those things aren't avoidable, but you'll want to adjust your calendar to have a realistic idea on how long it's going to take to get through the approval of all of these various agencies that you need to get through.
Yep. Tad, I mean, I think, you just said so many things that I hope resonates with our audience. Like, one being, when you run your business, you got to be that jack of all trades. No one's asking you to understand 100% of every portion of this, right? But you got to know enough of all of these elements to be dangerous, right? You got to surround yourself with those professionals who can help you navigate those things. Because, the one thing I'll say, we're talking about local approvals here. No open secret, the hardest thing to find in cannabis is capital, right? But if you're telling your investors, oh, I'm on the next CRC agenda, I'm going to get my approval, then I'm going to build out, and then all of a sudden you got to let them know that you got to go through a site plan process through the planning board, that you got to go through the Pinelands, and your 30-day timeline, your 90-day timeline has just become a 1.5-year timeline, right? Like, whether it's for your shareholders, whether it's for your investors, being educated on those points, I just think is another core function of running your business that sets the expectation up for everyone and potentially gets you ahead of that timeline. I think knowing enough to be dangerous on all these points is so critical. And I know we're right at the top of the hour, so I want to thank everyone for joining. I just want to remind everyone, this webinar is recorded, so we will circulate this to folks on our list. If you're not on our list, feel free to reach out to us. You have our Twitter handle there, our LinkedIn handle, and our website has a contact page as well. I want to thank everyone on this panel. Such tremendous resources on this pivotal issue for how this industry is going to expand moving forward. So Again, I want to thank everyone for joining us here today. I especially want to thank our panelists. More work to do, more conversations to be had, but without these conversations, we can't figure out how to continue to tweak and evolve this industry. I think, as the governor said, once adult use was legalized, this is an industry we're going to tweak into existence, and certainly the local angles is something that we're going to continue to tweak in real time. So thank you everyone for joining us. Thank you to the panelists, and looking forward to our next one. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you for joining, everybody.